Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The forest held its breath tonight, a stillness so profound it felt like a warning. Moonlight, thin and sharp as splintered bone, cut through the canopy of ancient pines, striping the mossy ground in silver and black. For 5 years, this silence had been Rhea's sanctuary. Here, she was not the disgraced Omega, the mute outcast whose wolf had never answered her call. She was simply a guardian, a whisper in the woods, her only language the soft hum that soothed the orphaned pups nestled in the hollow of a lightning-scarred oak. Their sleeping breaths were the rhythm of her heart, the scent of their milk and earth fur a balm on the phantom ache of a pack she'd long since lost. But tonight, the moon felt less like a goddess and more like a hunter, its cold eye fixed upon her. A tremor ran through the smallest of the 3 pups, Kale, his downy fur the color of winter frost. He whimpered in his sleep, his tiny legs twitching as if chasing dream rabbits. Rhea ran a gentle hand down, his spine, her touch a silent lullaby. She knew their heartbeats better than her own, could read the subtle shift of an ear or the flick of a tail. Fen, the boldest, was splayed out with the confidence of a future alpha, while Lyra, ever watchful, slept curled into a tight, defensive ball. They were her world, these 3 small souls abandoned at the edge of the blighted woods, a gift and a secret she guarded with ferocious tenderness. Her silence, once a brand of shame from the night of fire and screams that had stolen her voice, had become her greatest shield. No one could track a woman who left no words in her wake. But a shield is only as strong as the threat it was built to withstand. And tonight, the air itself tasted of something inevitable. Kyle stirred again, no longer dreaming. His small, dark nose twitched, sampling a scent on the wind that Rhea couldn't catch. His eyes, the color of wet river stones, blinked open, unfocused and wide with a primal instinct that had no place in a pup so young. He scrambled to his paws, clumsy and uncoordinated, and stumbled out from the warmth of his siblings. Rhea reached for him, a soft, questioning sound caught in her throat, a puff of air that held no vibration. "Hush, little one. The night is for sleeping." But Kale didn't seem to hear her. He tilted his head back, his fragile neck exposed to the unforgiving moonlight. His chest swelled, a tiny barrel of gathering power, and a sound tore from his throat that shattered the sacred quiet of Rhea's world. It wasn't the yip of a lost pup. It was a howl, a pure, resonant call that seemed impossibly ancient, filled with a longing so profound it made the very trees ache. It was a summons, a declaration, a beacon fired into the heart of the night. And the world answered. The ground did not just shake. It groaned, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated up through the soles of Rhea's worn leather boots and into her bones. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and burnt embers, a smell that clawed at the locked doors of her memory. It was the scent of the Alpha King's army, the scent of the night her village burned, the night her throat was filled with so much smoke and screaming that when the sun rose, only silence remained. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced her. She lunged for Kale, scooping his trembling body into her arms. He had gone limp, the unnatural power that had fueled the howl gone as quickly as it had come. Fen and Lyra were awake now, pressing against her legs, their low whines a desperate question she could not answer. She had to run. She had to disappear back into the shadows that had kept her safe for so long. But her feet were rooted to the spot. The forest, once her ally, now felt like a cage. The familiar trees seemed to have shifted, their branches twisting into skeletal fingers that pointed toward the clearing's edge. A mist, thick and gray as a wolf's pelt, swirled in from the dark, coalescing into a shape that was too tall, too broad, too utterly still to be natural. Out of that mist, he stepped. Silence fell, absolute and crushing. The crickets went quiet. The wind died. Even the pups' frightened whines were strangled in their throats. He was a creature born of shadow and myth, larger than any wolf shifter she had ever seen. Broad shoulders were draped in a cloak of black fur that seemed to drink the moonlight, and the leather armor beneath it was scarred with the marks of 100 battles. A jagged, silver scar cut from his left temple down across his jaw, a stark river against the hard planes of his face. He moved with a lethal grace that contradicted his size, each step a deliberate, predatory placement that made no sound on the damp earth. But it was his scent that undid her. Pine and smoke, yes, but beneath it, something more. The raw, untamed power of a thunderstorm held captive, the metallic tang of old blood, and a deep, masculine musk that spoke of ancient lines, absolute dominion. It was the scent from her nightmares, the scent of the conqueror. And then he lifted his head, and his eyes found her. They were not the eyes of a man. They were gold, molten, luminous gold that burned with an intensity that stripped her bare. Seeing past her ragged clothes, past her snow-pale hair, and into the terrified heart of her, his gaze swept over her for a mere second before dropping to the pups cowering at her feet. A muscle in his jaw clenched, and the overwhelming aura of power radiating from him sharpened into something possessive, something deeply pained. He took another step forward, and Rhea flinched, instinctively pulling Kale tighter against her chest, her body a frail shield for the 3 lives she cherished more than her own. She met his gaze, defiance warring with terror in her moonlit eyes. She could not speak, but her entire being screamed a single word: no. He stopped, his golden eyes lifting back to her face. They traced the line of her jaw, the fall of her white hair, the fierce protectiveness in her stance. For a fleeting moment, the raw power in his expression flickered, replaced by a look of stunned, incredulous recognition. It was as if he were seeing a ghost. His voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was a low, guttural rumble that seemed to vibrate from the earth itself, a sound that bypassed her ears and settled deep in her soul. "They're my blood," he said, the words edged with the certainty of a king stating an undeniable truth. Rhea's world tilted on its axis. His, the abandoned pups, the orphans she had saved, were the children of the monster who haunted her past. The realization was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. The life she had built here, this small pocket of peace, was founded on the greatest possible lie. She had been nurturing the kin of her destroyer. He took one more step, closing the distance until he was only an arm's length away. The heat from his body washed over her, and his scent was an intoxicating poison, overwhelming her senses. He was so close she could see the flecks of black in his golden irises, the faint tremor in his scarred hand as he held it, clenched, at his side. His gaze was locked on hers now, filled with a storm of emotions she couldn't begin to decipher: rage, grief, disbelief, and something else, something so primal and consuming it terrified her more than anything. He looked at her as if he had been starved for the sight of her, as if he were memorizing a face he thought he'd lost forever. His throat worked, and his next words were not a king's decree, but a raw, broken whisper that shattered what was left of her reality. "And you," he breathed, his golden eyes burning into hers. "You're my stolen mate." The words hung in the frozen air, more shocking than the pup's howl, more devastating than the tremor that had shaken the earth. My stolen mate. Rhea's mind recoiled, a frantic, silent denial screaming through her veins. It was a mistake, a cruel, impossible lie designed to break her spirit in a way fists and fire never could. Mates were a thing of myth and poetry for someone like her. She was a hollow shell, a wolfless omega whose own inner beast had died or fled the night her voice was taken. She was nothing, less than nothing. How could she be the fated counterpart to him? King Draven Solmar. The name was a curse whispered in the dark, a name synonymous with conquest and ash. He was the Wolf King who had unified the warring territories under a single, bloody banner. He was the Alpha of Alphas, a force of nature whose power was said to rival that of the moon itself. And he was looking at her not as a conqueror looks at a captive, but as a starving man looks at his first and only meal. The raw, possessive hunger in his golden eyes was a violation, stripping away the 5 years of solitude she had wrapped around herself like a shroud. She took a half step back, her bare foot catching on a root. The movement was clumsy, jarring Kale in her arms. The pup let out a soft cry, burying his face in the curve of her neck. The familiar weight, the trusting warmth, was her only anchor in the swirling vortex of his presence. Fen and Lyra pressed closer, a unified front of trembling fur and low growls that were laughably inadequate against the titan before them. "You don't remember," Draven stated, the words less a question and more a diagnosis of a deep and terrible wound. The guttural rumble of his voice was gone, replaced by a tone laced with a pain so profound it seemed to bleed into the air around him. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his hands held open at his sides in a gesture of peace that his entire being contradicted. "The fire, the smoke, it took more than your voice, didn't it?" Every muscle in Rhea's body screamed at her to flee, to gather her pups and vanish into the labyrinthine woods that had always protected her, but his gaze held her fast. It was like being caught in the heart of a storm, the sheer pressure of his will, a physical force. His scent was a suffocating cloud of pine, old embers, and a musk so intrinsically male and powerful that it awakened something dormant and feminine deep within her, a part of herself she thought had long since shriveled and died. It was terrifying. It was intoxicating. Her mind screamed monster, but a traitorous, forgotten instinct deep in her belly whispered mine. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the war between memory and instinct. A flicker of something akin to hope, or perhaps desperation, crossed his scarred face. "My name is Draven," he said, as if introducing himself to a stranger, as if they weren't standing in a moonlit clearing with the ghosts of a massacre between them. "We met before the flames, before my crown. Do you remember a market, by the river? A vendor selling moon-petal charms?" His words were nonsense, shards of a life that wasn't hers. The only market she remembered was the one that had been reduced to cinders. The only river she knew was the one she'd crossed to escape his army's advance. She shook her head, a short, sharp gesture of negation. The motion made her pale hair, stark white against the gloom, swing across her shoulders. His golden eyes tracked the movement, and his jaw tightened. "You wore your hair in a braid," he murmured, his voice dropping to a near whisper, lost in a memory she couldn't access. "Woven with bluebells. You laughed, and the sound, it was like wind chimes." The image was so alien, so utterly disconnected from the silent, haunted woman she was now, that a hysterical bubble of soundless laughter threatened to choke her. Laughter? Wind chimes? He was mad, or he had mistaken her for someone else, some ghost with her face and a voice of music. He must have seen the disbelief, the fear hardening into defiance. He sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of his entire kingdom. His gaze dropped to the pups, and the predatory intensity softened into something else entirely. Pity. Sorrow. "They are my brother's children," he said, his voice regaining its kingly authority, yet underscored with grief. "His name was Lorcan. He and his mate were betrayed, murdered by those who sought my throne. They thought to extinguish my line by abandoning his pups in the blighted woods, leaving them for the beasts or the frost." He looked back at her, and the gratitude in his eyes was a palpable force. "But they found you. The moon guided them to their lost queen." "Queen!" The word was a slap. She clutched Kale tighter, her knuckles white. She was a scavenger, a hermit living on the fringes of a world that had discarded her. She was a keeper of secrets and a tender of orphans, not a queen. "I have been searching for them since I learned of Lorcan's death," Draven continued, his voice hardening again, the steel of the king, returning. "I felt their bloodline, a faint echo on the wind. But tonight," he looked at Kale, nestled in her arms. "Tonight," the pup howled with the voice of my ancestors, a call of pure royal blood that no one with the Solmar gift could ignore. It was a beacon. It led me here, to them, to you. He took another step, and this time Rhea didn't retreat. She stood her ground, a silent, wild thing guarding her young. Let him be a king. Let them be his blood. They were hers. She had found them, whimpering and half dead. She had warmed them with her own body, chewed their food when they were too weak to eat, hummed them to sleep through fevers and thunderstorms. Her love was the only home they had ever known. Draven stopped just beyond her reach. He didn't look at her face now, but at her hands, at the way they protectively cradled the pup. His gaze followed the line of her arm up to her wrist. There, tied with a fraying leather cord, was a small, woven charm of dried moon petals, faded and delicate. It was the only thing she had left from her mother, a trinket she'd clutched in her fist through the night of the fire. Its familiar shape a comfort in the silent years that followed. His breath hitched. Slowly, as if moving against the weight of the world, he lifted his hand. It was a large hand, calloused and scarred, the hand of a warrior and a king, but his movements were infinitely gentle, telegraphing his intent, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She remained frozen, mesmerized by the strange, reverent light that had entered his eyes. His fingers, warm and rough, brushed against her skin. A jolt, white-hot and electric, shot up her arm. It was not a spark of static. It was a current of pure, vital energy, as if a dormant circuit within her had suddenly been completed. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, shocking silence in her mind. For the first time in 5 years, the constant low-grade hum of fear and loss that was the background noise of her life vanished. In its place was a resonance, a feeling of being seen, of being known on a cellular level. The mate bond, it was real, and it was screaming inside her. His thumb traced the pattern of the moon petal charm. His touch was a brand, setting her skin alight. The world narrowed to that single point of contact, to the overwhelming scent of him, to the impossible truth roaring through her blood. His golden eyes, burning with an ancient, undeniable certainty, met hers. His voice was a raw, broken thing, filled with 5 years of agony and disbelief. "I know this," he whispered, his gaze locked on the charm, his touch the anchor in her spinning world. "I gave this to you." His words were a key turning a lock in a part of her mind she hadn't known was sealed. "I gave this to you." The touch of his calloused thumb against her wrist was not just a spark. It was an inferno, burning away the fog of years. A memory, fractured and fleeting, pierced the veil of her amnesia. Sunlight, not moonlight. The noisy chatter of a riverside market, the scent of fried honey cakes and river reeds. A young man, broad-shouldered even then, with eyes the color of summer gold, his face not yet marred by a crown or a scar. He hadn't been a king then, just a visiting warrior whose presence drew stares, his aura of power a quiet hum, not the roaring torrent it was now. "For luck," a voice echoed in the phantom chambers of her memory. His voice, younger, softer. "So the moon will always guide you back to me." Rhea snatched her hand back as if burned, the fragile memory shattering like glass. The charm felt suddenly heavy on her wrist, a brand of a past she couldn't fully reclaim, and a future she couldn't bear to face. The connection between them, the searing arc of the mate bond, was undeniable. It pulsed in the space he had created by stepping back, a living, breathing entity that bound her to the man who was the embodiment of all her pain. Her denial was a physical force. She shook her head, her pale hair a frantic cloud around her face, her eyes wide with a terror that went beyond the fear of a king. This was the fear of losing herself, the fragile identity she had painstakingly built from silence and solitude. To be his mate was to be his. It was to be absorbed into his world of fire and blood, to become a queen to the man whose army had orphaned her. The irony was a poison dart to the heart. Draven saw the rejection in every line of her body. The hope that had flickered in his eyes was extinguished, replaced by a grim, unyielding resolve. The king returned, his shoulders squaring, his gaze hardening into something possessive and absolute. He had found what was his, and he would not be denied again. "You have been living a half-life in the shadows," he stated, his voice a low command that brooked no argument. "That ends tonight. You are the Alpha Queen. These pups are the heirs of the Mentor, Southern Reach. Your place is not in the dirt and leaves, but on a throne, by my side, his side." The words conjured images of stone halls and whispering courtiers, of gilded cages and a suffocating weight of duty. Her forest, her sanctuary, suddenly seemed infinitely precious, its quiet solitude a paradise she was about to lose. She backed away, her movements no longer clumsy but fluid, a creature of the wild preparing for flight. She shifted Kael in her arms, her body coiled like a spring. Fen and Lyra, sensing her intent, moved with her, their tiny bodies pressed against her legs, their low growls escalating. Draven let out a short, humorless laugh, a harsh sound in the sacred quiet. "Do not think you can run from me, little moonbeam. There is no corner of this continent I would not burn to find you again. I lost you once. I will not lose you twice." He took a deliberate step forward, and then another, his movements slow, measured, the pace of a predator cornering its prey. He wasn't chasing. He was hurting. Rhea's heart hammered against her ribs. She glanced wildly around the clearing, seeking an escape route, but every shadow seemed to hold his power. Every tree seemed to be an extension of his will. The forest had betrayed her. "They need a pack," he said, his golden eyes fixed on the pups. "They need training, protection. They need their birthright. You cannot give them that, huddled in a hollow oak. You can give them love, and you have," he conceded, his voice softening for a barest second. "But you cannot teach them how to command the earth and sky as a Solmar wolf must. I can." His words were true, and that was the cruelest part. She had seen the raw, untamed power in Kale's howl. She had felt the earth respond to it. What life could she offer them? A half-starved, hidden existence, always looking over their shoulders. She could love them, yes, but love could not protect them from their own immense, volatile legacy. He was closer now, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, smell the scent of pine and dominion on his skin. He didn't reach for her. He knelt. The movement was so unexpected, so contrary to his overwhelming power, that it stunned her into stillness. The great Alpha King, the conqueror of nations, knelt in the damp earth before her, a silent, wolfless Omega. His head was bowed, but his golden eyes lifted to meet hers, stripped of command and filled with a raw, aching plea. "Rhea," he breathed her name, the sound a prayer and a lament. 5 years. For 5 years, I have ruled a kingdom of ash and ghosts. Every day, the bond has been a phantom limb, an ache for a soul I thought was lost to the flames. I have been half of a whole, a king with a hole in his chest where his heart should be. I will not force you, I will not drag you in chains. But I am begging you, come home. Let me heal what was broken. Let me give you back the world that was stolen from you." His vulnerability was a more potent weapon than his power. It slipped past her defenses, past the walls of fear and hatred, and touched the core of her loneliness. For 5 years, she too had been a ghost, haunting the edges of a world she no longer belonged to. She had been safe, but she had not been alive. Slowly, hesitantly, she looked down at the pups. Kale was watching Draven with wide, curious eyes, his fear replaced by a strange sense of recognition. Lyra, ever cautious, remained pressed to Rhea's leg, but her growl had subsided to a low, questioning whine. It was Fen, the bold one, who made the first move. He stepped away from Rhea's protection, his tail giving a tentative wag. He padded forward, sniffing the air, and then, with the simple, trusting innocence of the very young, he nudged his wet nose against the king's armored knee. Draven's scarred hand, which had rested on his thigh, moved with infinite slowness. He extended his fingers, letting the pup scent him. Fen licked his knuckles, a gesture of submission and acceptance, an alpha pup recognizing his alpha king. The sight broke something inside Rhea. The last of her resistance crumbled, not to the king's power, but to the undeniable truth of a family being reunited. She was their mother in spirit, but he was their kin in blood. To keep them from him would be a different kind of cruelty, a selfishness born of her own fear. Her gaze met his over the pup's small head. The silent question in her eyes was clear. "Will you protect them? Will they be safe?" His answer was not in words, but in the fierce, unwavering oath that blazed in his golden eyes. He would tear the world apart for them, for all of them. With a deep, shuddering breath that felt like a surrender, Rhea gave a slow, deliberate nod. A wave of relief so profound washed over Draven's face that he seemed momentarily younger, the weight of years lifting from his shoulders. He rose to his feet in one fluid motion, the king once more, but the harsh lines around his eyes had softened. He held out his hand, palm up, an offering, a promise. "The path will not be easy," he warned, his voice low and serious. "My court is a nest of vipers who have grown comfortable with a widowed, heirless king. They will see you as a threat, a silent, wolfless Omega with my brother's pups on her skirts. They will test you. They will try to break you." He paused, his gaze burning into hers. Let them try. She looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. The journey ahead was a path of thorns, leading from the quiet moonlight of her forest to the glittering danger of his court. But for the first time in 5 years, it was a path she would not have to walk alone. With a trembling hand, still clutching the faded moon-petal charm, she placed it in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, strong, and absolute. It was not a capture, it was a homecoming. The journey from her forest sanctuary to Draven's fortress was a disorienting blur of motion and sensation. They did not walk. Draven placed a hand on her back, a touch that sent shivers of both apprehension and a strange, comforting warmth through her thin tunic, and led her to the edge of the clearing. There, 2 of his royal guard waited, their forms massive and still as ancient stones. Their armor was the color of dried blood, and their eyes, when they flickered towards her, held a mixture of shock and suspicion. She was an anomaly, a wild thing plucked from the woods, clutching a king's heir in her arms. One of the guards, a grim-faced wolf with a scar that mirrored Draven's own, stepped forward. "My king," he began, his voice a low growl of concern, but Draven cut him off with a single sharp gesture. "She is with me, Gareth. She is the queen." The words were spoken with an air of finality that permitted no argument. Gareth's eyes widened, his gaze sweeping over Rhea again, this time with a dawning, incredulous respect. He bowed his head low, a gesture Rhea found profoundly unsettling. Draven shifted, his body changing with a sound of cracking bone and stretching sinew that made the pups whimper. Where the man had stood, a wolf now loomed. He was colossal, a beast of nightmare and legend. His fur was the color of obsidian, with streaks of silver at his muzzle and along his powerful flanks. His eyes remained that same, burning gold, intelligent, and utterly commanding. He nudged her hand with his massive head, a silent instruction. "Trust me." The journey that followed was unlike anything she had ever known. He moved through the trees not as an intruder, but as a part of the forest itself, a living shadow that flowed over the landscape. Rhea, perched precariously on his broad back, with Kale tucked inside her tunic, and the other 2 pups held securely by Gareth's shifted form, could only hold on. The world became a stream of silver moonlight and black trunks, the wind whipping her pale hair behind her. It was terrifying and exhilarating, this raw, untamed power. It was the power of a true alpha, a power her own weak blood had never been able to produce. They arrived at the Onyx Citadel as the first hint of dawn bruised the eastern sky. The fortress was not built so much as clawed from the heart of a mountain. Its towers were jagged black spires that pierced the clouds, and the stone of its walls seemed to drink the light. It was a place of immense strength and profound sorrow, a monument to a king's unyielding will. As they passed through the great iron gates, the scent of the court assaulted her. Where her forest had smelled of damp earth, pine, and living things, this place reeked of stone, steel, perfumed oils, and something else, the bitter, metallic tang of ambition and deceit. Whispers followed them through the cold, echoing halls. Servants and courtiers, emerging for their morning duties, stopped dead in their tracks, their eyes wide with shock. They saw their king in his wolf form, and on his back, a wild-looking woman with moon-white hair, clutching pups that bore the unmistakable silver markings of the lost Solmar line. The whispers were like the rustle of dry, venomous things in the dark. Wolfless. A mute. Look at the rags she wears. She smells of the forest, of dirt. A breeder, perhaps? A surrogate for the lost heirs? Each whispered barb was a tiny knife against her skin. Rhea hunched her shoulders, pulling the pups closer, her silence a vast, empty chamber in which their insults echoed and amplified. She had forgotten the cruelty of the pack, the casual disdain of the strong for the weak. In her forest, she had been a guardian. Here, she was a specimen, a curiosity, a flaw in the perfect, brutal tapestry of the court. Draven, back in his human form, seemed oblivious to the whispers, or perhaps he simply deemed them beneath his notice. He led her not to the grand throne room, but through a series of quieter, private corridors to a suite of rooms, high in the central spire. The chambers were vast and opulent, with a roaring hearth, furs thick enough to sink into, and a balcony that overlooked the entire kingdom, a dizzying panorama of mountains and mist. It was a cage, however gilded, "You will be safe here," he said, his voice softer now that they were alone. "No one will enter without my permission." He gestured to a series of maids who had entered silently behind them, their heads bowed. "They will bring you food, water, clothes, anything you require." Rhea slid off his back, her legs trembling. She clutched her pups, her only familiar comfort in this alien world of stone and luxury. She looked at the maids, at their carefully blank faces, and saw not help, but more eyes, more judges. She shook her head, taking a step back towards the cold stone of the wall. A flicker of frustration crossed Draven's face. "You cannot live in rags, Rhea. You are a queen." She met his gaze, and for the first time let the full force of her silent fury show. "You brought me here, to this place of knives and whispers. You named me queen, but I am still the same broken thing I was in the forest. A title does not mend what is shattered." He understood. The frustration in his eyes softened, replaced by a weary understanding. He dismissed the maids with a wave of his hand. "Very well. We will do this at your pace." He knelt, his attention shifting to the pups who were now tumbling out of her arms, exploring their new, strange den with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He let them sniff his hands, crawl over his boots, his presence a mountain of calm reassurance. "They need a name," he murmured, stroking Fenn's back. "A pack name. My brother's line will not be forgotten." Rhea watched him, this king who could command armies, kneeling on the floor and playing with pups. The contrast was jarring. She saw in him not the monster of her nightmares, but the alpha his blood demanded he be, a protector, a patriarch. The thought was deeply unsettling. It was easier to hate a monster than to understand a man burdened by destiny. She moved to the hearth, seeking its warmth against the chill that had settled deep in her bones. From the corner of her eye, she saw Draven stand and approach a heavy carved chest at the foot of the massive bed. He lifted the lid, the scent of cedar and old leather filling the room. He rummaged for a moment before pulling something out. He walked towards her, holding a small wooden box. He didn't press it into her hands. He simply set it on the mantelpiece beside her. "This was my mother's," he said quietly. "She was not a shifter of great strength. Her wolf was gentle, more of a healer than a warrior. The court scorned her for it. They called her the Doe Queen. But my father, the king, adored her. He said her quiet strength was the anchor that kept his own rage from consuming him." Rhea's gaze fell to the box. It was simple, elegant, inlaid with a silver wolf howling at a mother-of-pearl moon. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. She understood silence. Draven continued, his voice a low rumble beside her. "She once told me that words are often just noise to hide the truth. The truest things are felt, not said." His golden eyes met hers in the reflection of a polished silver mirror above the hearth. He wasn't looking at her as a king looks at a subject, or an alpha at an omega. He was looking at her as a man looks at a woman he is desperately trying to understand, to reach across an impossible chasm. With hesitant fingers, Rhea opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded black velvet, was not a glittering jewel, but a simple slate tablet and a piece of chalk. A gasp, thin and voiceless, escaped her lips. A way to speak, a way to answer the 1,000 questions in his eyes, to fight the whispers, to reclaim a piece of herself. Tears she hadn't shed in 5 years burned behind her eyes. It was a simple gift, yet it was more precious than any crown. It was the gift of a voice. She picked up the chalk, its familiar, dusty texture a comfort. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely form the letters. She looked from the slate to his intense, waiting face. What could she say? What were the first words she would speak after 5 years of silence? "Thank you." "Who are you? Why?" Her hand moved, the chalk scratching against the slate, a sound that was deafening in the quiet room. She didn't write a question or a word of gratitude. She wrote a demand, a single, defiant word that was both a plea and a challenge, the first brick she would lay in the foundation of her new life. She held it up for him to see. "Teach me." The 2 words, stark and white against the black slate, were a declaration of war. Not against him, Draven realized, but against the weakness that had been forced upon her. It was the plea of a captive demanding the keys to her own prison. A profound respect, fierce and sharp, cut through the possessive haze of the mate bond. This was no timid Omega to be sheltered and protected. This was a queen awakening from a long, cursed slumber. Everything, he vowed, his voice a low, solemn oath that resonated in the stone chamber. I will teach you everything, how to read the subtleties of the court, how to command the respect of the pack, how to wield your silence not as a shield, but as a weapon. And I will teach you about us, about the bond. The days that followed blurred into a strange new rhythm. Her mornings were spent with the pups in the relative safety of their chambers. She was their constant, their calm center, in a world of new sounds and smells. But her afternoons and evenings belonged to Draven. He kept his word. He became her tutor, her strategist, her reluctant historian. Using the slate, Rhea asked the questions that had haunted her. She wrote of the fire, of the screams, of a village turned to ash. Her chalk strokes were angry, jagged with grief. Draven's face was a mask of stone as he read her words. He did not offer excuses or platitudes. He gave her the brutal, unvarnished truth. It was a rebellion, he explained, his voice flat, devoid of the emotion that tightened the muscles in his jaw. Lord Valerius of the North Ridge refused to bend the knee when I united the territories. Your village was loyal to him. He used them as a barricade, sacrificing them to slow my army's advance. The fire was his doing, a scorched earth tactic. He burned his own people to frame me as a butcher and fuel the insurrection. He paced the chamber like a caged wolf, the memory a living demon in the room with them. By the time my forces broke through his lines, it was too late. We found you in the ashes of the healer's hut, barely breathing. Your throat was damaged from the smoke. The healers said you would never speak again, and your wolf, she had retreated, gone dormant from the trauma. You were alive, but empty. He stopped, turning to face her, his golden eyes blazing with a self-loathing so intense it was a physical force. And then you were gone, slipped away from the camp in the chaos of the next battle. I searched. I sent my best trackers, but it was like you had vanished from the earth. I thought you were dead. For 5 years, I have mourned a mate I believed was lost to me forever. The truth was a bitter pill. Her hatred, the simple, clean fire she had nursed for 5 years, had been directed at the wrong man. It left a hollow ache in its place. She was not the victim of a conqueror, but a casualty of a traitor's ambition. It didn't lessen the pain, but it muddied the waters of her animosity towards Draven, leaving her feeling adrift. He taught her of the court, drawing her diagrams of the political alliances on the back of a discarded map. He named the Vipers, Lady Isolde, a sleek, black-haired she-wolf from an old and powerful bloodline, whose ambition was an open secret. Lord Cassian, a silver-tongued beta who commanded the treasury, and whose loyalty was always for sale. And Gareth, his second-in-command, whose loyalty was absolute, but whose belief in her was not. They see your silence and your dormant wolf as a weakness in my rule, Draven explained, his finger tracing a line between Isolde's name and a faction of disgruntled border lords. They believe a wolfless queen cannot produce a true alpha heir. They do not yet know the pups are my brothers. For now, we let them believe they are yours. It will draw the poison to the surface. Rhea felt a chill crawl up her spine. He was using her, and the pups, as bait. The realization should have angered her, but a cold, pragmatic part of her understood the necessity. In this court of whispering knives, survival was a game of strategy, and she was the most unexpected piece on the board. The tension in the citadel grew with each passing day, culminating in the formal announcement of a blood moon hunt. It was an ancient tradition, a ritualistic hunt held under the crimson light of the lunar eclipse, where the pack's hierarchy was reaffirmed, and challenges could be made. Draven announced that he would formally present his queen to the court that night. The maids, now, less intimidating under Draven's watchful eye, dressed her in a gown the color of midnight, its fabric cool and smooth against her skin. It was simple, unadorned with the jewels the other court ladies favored, but it fit her perfectly, accentuating the stark white of her hair and the pale luminescence of her skin. She looked in the silver mirror and saw a stranger, not the dirt-smudged hermit of the forest, nor the frightened girl from her past. She saw a queen, forged in silence and shadow. As she entered the great hall on Draven's arm, a hush fell. The vast chamber, lit by hundreds of torches that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls, was packed with the wolf shifters of the court. Their collective stare was a physical weight. She could smell their emotions on the air: curiosity, disbelief, and from a corner where Lady Isolde stood, cloaked in crimson, a scent of pure, unadulterated venom. Draven led her to the twin thrones on the dais. He did not sit. He stood before the pack, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword, his presence so immense it commanded the very air in the hall. Tonight, under the eye of the blood moon, we reaffirm the strength of this pack. His voice boomed, echoing off the high, vaulted ceilings. For 5 years, this throne has had a shadow at its side. No more. I present to you Rhea Solmar. She was lost to me, and has been returned. She is my mate, your queen. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Isolde stepped forward, her movements as fluid and dangerous as a panther's. A cruel, knowing smile played on her lips. A lovely sentiment, my king, she purred, her voice dripping with false deference. But a queen must be more than just a pretty face. A queen must be strong. Her wolf must be strong, to ensure the strength of the royal line. We have not seen her wolf. We have not heard her voice. How are we to know she is not flawed? A barren vessel unfit to carry a true alpha's heir? The insult was a poisoned dart, aimed directly at Rhea's deepest insecurities. She felt the blood drain from her face. Beside her, she felt Draven's body go rigid, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His rage was a palpable thing, a beast straining at its leash. But before he could unleash it, Rhea moved. She remembered his lesson. Wield your silence as a weapon. She placed a hand on his arm, a silent command to wait. The entire court watched, holding its breath. She stepped down from the dais, her midnight gown flowing around her. She walked with a calm, deliberate grace she did not feel, moving directly towards Isolde. The she-wolf's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Surprised by the direct confrontation, Rhea stopped a mere foot from her. She did not need a voice to issue a challenge. She simply met Isolde's dark, malevolent eyes. She held her gaze, her own moonlit eyes unwavering, filled not with fear, but with the cold, quiet fury of a winter storm. She let the silence stretch, becoming an entity of its own, a suffocating pressure in the hall. The whispers died. The pack watched, mesmerized by this silent battle of wills. In her silence, Rhea screamed everything. You are nothing. Your words are noise. My strength is not in my howl, but in my survival. I have walked through fire. I have lived with ghosts. You, with your petty ambitions and your loud, empty words, are less than a shadow to me. Isolde's composure finally cracked. A faint sheen of sweat appeared on her brow. She was the one who looked away first, her eyes flicking to the side in a micro-gesture of submission. A collective gasp went through the hall. The silent, wolfless Omega had just dominated one of the most powerful alphas in the court without laying a hand on her, without speaking a single word. A slow, predatory smile touched Rhea's lips. She turned her back on the humiliated she-wolf and walked back to the throne. But as she reached the dais, a sharp, searing pain shot through her wrist, originating from the moon petal charm. It was not a physical pain, but an agony of the soul, a tearing, violent sensation. She cried out, a strangled, voiceless sound, and collapsed to her knees, clutching her arm. Draven was at her side in an instant, his face a mask of alarm. Rhea, what is it? Across the hall, Isolde was laughing, a triumphant, ugly sound. In her hand, she held a small, black-bladed knife, its tip dripping with a viscous, shimmering liquid. A shard of obsidian was embedded in the hilt. You see, my king? Isolde called out, her voice ringing with victory. A simple severing curse. A bond is only as strong as its weakest link, and your link is broken. Rhea looked down at her wrist. The charm, her mother's charm, the one Draven had given her, was turning black, crumbling into ash. The bond, that warm, humming connection to him that had become her anchor in this chaotic world, was screaming, fraying, being forcibly torn from her soul. And in the sudden, terrifying void it left behind, she felt something else. A faint, desperate, stirring, deep within the dormant part of her spirit, the frantic terrified scratching of a wolf clawing its way out of a cage that was about to be destroyed. The pain was an all-consuming void. It wasn't the clean, sharp agony of a physical wound, but the spiritual torment of being torn in half. The mate bond, the golden thread that had woven itself into the fabric of her soul, was being violently unraveled. Every nerve ending screamed in protest. The quiet hum of connection that had become her constant companion since Draven's return was replaced by a screeching, static-filled silence. It was worse than the 5 years of loneliness. This was an amputation. Through a haze of agony she saw Draven. He was no longer a king. He was a primal force of rage. A roar, so guttural and furious it shook the very stones of the hall, tore from his throat. His eyes were no longer gold but blazing pits of solar fire. He lunged for Isolde, his intent not merely to subdue, but to annihilate. But Gareth and 2 other guards, their faces grim with duty, threw themselves in his path. "My king, no," Gareth grunted, straining against Draven's immense strength. "Do not let her bait you into breaking pack law. A challenge must be met, not murdered on the hall floor." The pack, which had been frozen in shock, was now in an uproar. Some shouted for Isolde's blood, loyal to their king. Others, the vipers Draven had warned her of, watched with gleaming, opportunistic eyes, seeing a king consumed by a rage that could topple his own throne. Isolde stood her ground, a triumphant smirk on her face. "The curse is not fatal, my king," she taunted, her voice rising above the din. "It merely severs what is unnatural, a bond to a wolfless, barren Omega. I have done you a favor. I have cut away your weakness. Now you are free to choose a true queen, a queen who can give you an heir." She cast a better, meaningful glance at the assembled lords, her allies, who nodded in grim agreement. Rhea gasped, curling into a ball on the cold stone floor. The pain was receding, replaced by a terrifying, hollow emptiness. The part of her that was connected to Draven was just gone. She reached for him with her senses and found nothing but a cold, blank wall. The absence was a suffocating pressure, a deep-sea depth of isolation, and in that new, profound silence, she heard it, a whisper, a whimper, not from the outside world but from within. "Let me out." It was a faint, desperate thought, thin as a spider's thread, coming from the dormant corner of her soul where her wolf had been sleeping for 5 years. The severing of the mate bond, this violent spiritual trauma, had acted like a lightning strike to a dead heart. It had shocked her inner beast awake. The bond is gone. He cannot feel us. We are alone again. The wolf's voice was filled with a primal terror, the fear of an animal waking up, in a cage that was on fire. Draven, still held back by his guards, turned his blazing eyes to Rhea. The rage in them was warring with a desperate, panicked concern. He could no longer feel her. He could no longer sense her pain or her fear. To him, she had gone utterly silent, not just in voice, but in spirit. The look of loss on his face was a mirror of the emptiness inside her. He finally shoved Gareth aside, not with violence, but with a surge of pure alpha command that forced his men to their knees. He strode to Rhea, kneeling before her, his large hands hovering, afraid to touch her, as if she were made of brittle glass. "Rhea?" His voice was raw, broken. She looked up at him, into the eyes of the man who was now a stranger to her soul. She wanted to reach for him, to tell him she was still here, but the chasm between them felt a universe wide. "He cannot protect us now," the wolf whimpered inside her. "They will kill us. They will kill the pups." The thought of the pups was a splash of icy water. Kale, Fen, Lyra. They were upstairs, protected by a few loyal guards, but if Draven fell, if Isolde and her conspirators seized power, the heirs would be the first to be eliminated. A new strength, born not of a bond but of a mother's fierce, desperate love, surged through Rhea. She pushed herself up, her limbs trembling. She had to fix this. She had to fight. She got to her feet, swaying, and faced Isolde. The she-wolf laughed. "Look at it, still trying to stand. Pathetic. Your king is bound by law, but I am not. I challenge you, Omega. A trial by combat. For the right to be Alpha Queen. If you will not fight, then forfeit your claim and be cast out." It was a death sentence. Rhea had no wolf, no formal combat training. Isolde was a seasoned warrior, her movements fluid and deadly even in her courtly gown. "She will not fight," Draven snarled, stepping in front of Rhea, a human shield. "This is my battle." "No," Isolde countered, her eyes gleaming with cunning. "You said it yourself. She is your queen. The challenge is to her. If you interfere, you break the most sacred law of the pack. You will be seen as a tyrant, not a king. Your own guards will be forced to turn against you." It was a perfect trap. He was hamstrung by the very laws he was sworn to uphold. Rhea looked at his back, at the rigid line of his shoulders, the tension in his powerful frame. He was trapped. But she wasn't. "Let me fight," the voice of her wolf pleaded. Stronger now, fueled by the adrenaline of fear. "We will die anyway. Let us die fighting." Rhea placed a hand on Draven's arm. He turned, his golden eyes filled with anguish. "I will not let you do this," he whispered fiercely. She met his gaze and shook her head. She picked up the slate, which a page had retrieved and placed on the steps of the dais. Her hand was surprisingly steady now. The chalk flew across the surface. She held it up for the entire court to see. "I accept." A wave of shock silenced the hall. Draven stared at the slate, then at her, his expression one of horrified disbelief. "Rhea, no, you don't understand. She will kill you." Rhea simply nodded. She knew, but she would not run. She would not hide in the forest again. She had found something worth fighting for, something beyond her own survival. The pups. And this broken king who had, against all odds, tried to give her back her world. Gareth stepped forward, his face pale. "The terms of the trial must be set. First blood, or to the death?" "To the death," Isolde hissed, a feral grin spreading across her face. "The pack needs a true alpha queen, not a broken toy." The hall was cleared. A circle formed. Torches were brought in, their light casting long, monstrous shadows. Rhea stood alone in the center of the ring, her simple midnight gown, a stark contrast to Isolde's blood-red attire. Isolde drew two wicked, curved daggers from sheaths hidden in her sleeves. Rhea was unarmed. The trial began. Isolde did not rush. She circled Rhea, enjoying the moment, her movements a predator's dance. "You should have stayed in your hovel, little mouse," she sneered. "The forest is where weak things go to die alone." Rhea stood still, her heart hammering. She didn't watch Isolde's eyes or her hands. She watched her feet, her hips, the way her weight shifted, just as Draven had taught her in their brief lessons on reading an opponent. "She is overconfident," the wolf whispered. "She expects us to run. She expects us to cower. She will strike high first, a blow to the throat, to silence you for good." Isolde lunged. It was exactly as the wolf had predicted, a lightning-fast slash aimed at her neck. Rhea did the one thing she wasn't expected to do. She didn't dodge back. She dropped, ducking under the whistling blade, and threw herself forward. She slammed her shoulder into Isolde's knees, a move of desperation, not skill. The larger she-wolf stumbled, surprised by the tactic. Rhea scrambled away, putting distance between them again. A low growl of frustration escaped Isolde's lips. The game was over. She came at Rhea in a furious flurry of steel, forcing her back, step by step. A blade sliced across Rhea's arm. Pain, sharp and hot, lanced through her. The scent of her own blood filled the air thin, weak, human blood. Isolde laughed. "Is that all you have, Omega? I can smell your fear. There is no wolf in you, nothing but a frightened little girl." She lunged again, this time a direct thrust for the heart. Rhea dodged, but the tip of the dagger caught her side, tearing through fabric and flesh. She cried out, stumbling back, her hand coming away wet and sticky. The world began to swim at the edges. Draven let out a strangled roar from the sideline, held in place only by the crushing weight of his crown and the law. His face was a mask of pure agony. As Rhea fell to one knee, her lifeblood seeping onto the stones, Isolde stood over her, raising a dagger for the final, killing blow. "It's over," Rhea thought, a wave of despair washing over her. "No!" The voice of her wolf was no longer a whisper. It was a roar that shook her very soul. "He will not have us. This bitch will not take our family." The pain in her side, the terror, the desperation, it all converged into a single point of pure, incandescent rage. The dormant part of her, the caged and sleeping beast, didn't just awaken, it exploded. A wave of power, raw and untamed, erupted from her. It was not the controlled, earthy power of an alpha like Draven. It was silver, wild, chaotic, the power of the moon itself. The air crackled. Her pale hair lifted as if in a gale, and her eyes, when she lifted her head to look at Isolde, were no longer the soft gray of moonlit stones. They were glowing with a brilliant, pure silver light, and for the first time in 5 years, a sound tore from her throat. It was not a word. It was a howl, filled with all the pain, the rage, and the silence of half a decade. It was the howl of a wolf who had been to hell and back. It was the howl of a Luna Queen. Isolde froze, her dagger inches from Rhea's heart, her face a mask of utter, mind-numbing shock. The entire pack stared in stunned disbelief, because as Rhea howled, the form kneeling on the floor began to change, to shift, not into the shape of a common wolf, but into something no one had seen in 1,000 years. Her bones elongated, her skin shimmered, and where the Omega had knelt, a wolf now stood. It was a creature of breathtaking beauty and terror, its fur the color of freshly fallen snow, its size rivaling Draven's own, and its eyes burned with the cold, unforgiving light of the full moon. The silence in the great hall was a living thing, a breathless vacuum left in the wake of her impossible howl. The sound still echoed in the rafters, a ghostly promise of the power now standing manifest in the center of the room. Rhea, or the creature that was now Rhea, shook her magnificent, snow-white pelt, and the movement was full of an ancient, fluid grace. The wound in her side was already closing, the silver light of her new form knitting flesh and fur back together. She was not just a wolf, she was Luna. The legends, the bedtime stories told to pups about the first she-wolf, the mate of the moon herself, were real. A Luna wolf had not been seen in generations, a bloodline thought to have been diluted into nothingness. They were said to be the anchors of the pack, the heart from which an alpha drew his true strength, their power not in brute force, but in a spiritual connection to their kin and the very tides of their world. Isolde stared, her face a comical mask of terror and disbelief. The dagger slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering onto the stone floor with a sound that seemed deafeningly loud. She had challenged a wolfless Omega and had instead summoned a goddess from the myths of her ancestors. She took a stumbling step back, then another, her alpha arrogance completely shattered. Rhea lifted her massive head, her silver eyes, cold and bright as twin stars, pinning Isolde in place. A low growl rumbled in her chest, a sound not of animal fury, but of judgment. It was the sound of a reckoning. She didn't need to attack. Her very presence was a weapon, an overwhelming wave of lunar power that pressed down on every shifter in the hall. They felt it in their bones, in the marrow of their wolf spirits, the return of their queen. Many of the lower-ranking wolves instinctively dropped to one knee, their heads bowed in a submission that was absolute. From the edge of the circle, Draven watched, his own shock warring with a fierce, soaring pride. The hollow void left by the severed bond was suddenly filled, not with the familiar warmth of their previous connection, but with a brilliant, overwhelming flood of silver light. It was her power, her very essence, reaching out not through the narrow channel of a mate bond, but as a broadcast to the entire pack. And to him, her alpha, it felt like the sun returning to a dead world. He could feel her. He could feel her strength, her rage, her triumph. It poured into him, revitalizing him, steadying the foundation of his own soul. He was no longer a king with a missing piece. He was an alpha with his Luna at his side, and the feeling was one of utter, unassailable completeness. Isolde finally broke. With a whimper of pure terror, she turned to flee. But Rhea was faster. She moved not with the heavy, ground-shaking strides of an alpha wolf, but with the silent, impossible speed of moonlight itself. She was a white blur, a phantom that flowed across the stone floor. She didn't tackle Isolde. She simply materialized in her path, a silent, immovable wall of white fur and silver eyes. Isolde fell backwards, scrambling away on her hands and feet like a frightened crab. "No, please," she begged, the last vestiges of her pride stripped away, revealing the sniveling coward beneath. Rhea took a deliberate step forward, then another, backing the terrified she-wolf towards the twin thrones on the dais. She herded her, a predator playing with its food, letting the terror build. The court watched, utterly captivated by the silent, lethal ballet. Finally, Isolde's back hit the cold stone of the thrones. She had nowhere left to run. Rhea stopped, looming over her, the very air around her crackling with power. She lowered her great head until her muzzle was inches from Isolde's face. She could have ripped her throat out. A single snap of her powerful jaws was all it would take. The pack waited, anticipating the bloody justice their traditions demanded. Instead, Rhea opened her mouth and let out a soft puff of air, ruffling Isolde's dark hair. It was a gesture of ultimate contempt. "You are not worth the blood on my teeth." Then she tilted her head back and let out a single, sharp bark of command. It was not a howl, but a clear, unequivocal order that every wolf in the room understood. "Submit." Isolde collapsed into a sobbing, shuddering heap on the floor, rolling onto her back and exposing her throat in the ultimate gesture of surrender. She was broken, utterly and irrevocably, not by tooth and claw, but by a power she could not comprehend. Rhea turned her back on the defeated she-wolf, dismissing her from existence. She padded gracefully, her claws clicking softly on the stone, to the center of the hall. She stood there for a moment, her silver gaze sweeping over the assembled pack, her pack, claiming them with her silent authority. She looked at the loyal, at the treacherous, at the fearful, and they all bowed their heads before her. Her gaze finally came to rest on Draven. He had not moved, but his golden eyes were blazing with an emotion so intense it was almost painful to witness. It was adoration, reverence, a love so profound it transcended the physical bond they had lost. He saw her not just as his mate, but as his equal, his other half, the missing piece of his kingdom's soul. Slowly, she walked towards him. The pack parted before her, like the sea before a goddess. She stopped directly in front of him, her silver eyes looking up into his gold. The two of them, Alpha and Luna, king and queen, were a portrait of perfect, primal power. She nudged his hand with her nose, a simple, trusting gesture that spoke volumes. Then, with the same shimmering, impossible grace, her form began to shift. The massive Luna wolf dissolved like mist, and in its place stood Rhea, the woman. She was naked, her skin gleaming in the torchlight, the wounds from Isolde's daggers completely gone, leaving no scars. Her pale hair was a wild halo around her face, and her moonlit eyes, no longer glowing, held a new, quiet confidence. She was still silent. Her voice had not returned with her wolf, but she no longer needed it. Draven shrugged off his heavy, fur-lined cloak and wrapped it around her shoulders. His hands lingered, his touch gentle, reverent. Their eyes met, and in that gaze, a new bond was forged. Not one of fate or magic, but one of choice, of trial by fire, of a shared victory. It was stronger, deeper, and more real than what had been taken from them. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. His voice, when he spoke, was for her ears only, a low, guttural rumble of pure emotion. "My queen," he breathed, the words a vow, a prayer, a promise of a new beginning. Before Rhea could respond, before she could even process the entirety of the night, a frantic cry came from the entrance of the great hall. A guard, one of those assigned to the pups, stumbled in, his face ashen with terror. "My king! The pups!" he gasped, pointing back towards the royal chambers. "They're gone!" At the same time, a cold, unnatural wind swept through the hall, extinguishing half the torches and plunging the room into shadow. From the direction of the queen's spire, a new scent cut through the air, overriding the smell of blood and fear. It was the smell of cold iron, of graveyard dust, and of the dark, forbidden magic of the traitor who had started it all. Lord Valerius had made his move. He hadn't just orchestrated Isolde's challenge from afar. While the pack was distracted by the drama in the throne room, he had come for the heirs. He had come to finish what he started 5 years ago. 1 year later, Rhea stood on the high balcony of the Queen's spire, the same balcony that had once felt like the edge of a gilded cage. Now, it was simply a place to watch the sun rise over her kingdom. The crisp morning air carried the scent of pine from the distant forest and the faint, comforting aroma of baking bread from the castle kitchens below. It was the scent of home, a home she had fought for, bled for, and finally, truly claimed as her own. Draven came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her back against the solid warmth of his chest. He didn't speak, just rested his chin on her shoulder, his presence a quiet, steady anchor. The bond between them had never magically returned. The curse knife had done its work too well. But what they had built in its place was infinitely stronger. It was a bond forged in shared glances, in the brush of a hand, in the silent understanding of two souls who had walked through fire and found each other on the other side. It was a bond of choice, renewed every single day. Below them, in the castle's main training yard, the sound of laughter echoed, sharp and bright. Fen, already broad-shouldered and radiating the nascent confidence of a future alpha, was trying to teach a visiting lord's son how to properly hold a wooden practice sword. He was a natural leader, patient and firm. Kale, smaller and more slender, sat off to the side, his head bent over a thick, leather-bound book, his brow furrowed in concentration. He had his uncle's mind, a strategist's soul, and Lyra, sleek and watchful, was perched on the top rail of the fence, her sharp eyes missing nothing, her protective gaze sweeping over her brothers and the entire yard. She was her mother's daughter, a guardian in the making. The pups were no longer pups. They were young wolves, thriving under the joint tutelage of the pack's weapon masters and their alpha king. But their true home, their safest harbor, was still with her. They would clamber into her bed at night, seeking her scent, her quiet presence, their heartbeats a familiar rhythm against her own. The hunt for Lord Valerius had been swift and brutal. With her Luna senses, Rhea had been able to track his foul, magical scent in a way Draven's trackers never could. She had led the hunt herself, a silent, white wolf, running at the head of the pack, Draven a black shadow at her side. They had cornered Valerius in the ruins of an old mountain fortress, the same one where he had murdered Draven's brother. He had not taken the pups to harm them, they discovered, but to try and perform a dark ritual to twist their royal blood to his own purposes, to create puppets he could use to claim the throne. The battle had been short. Valerius's dark magic was no match for the combined might of an Alpha King and a Luna Queen. It was Rhea who had delivered the final, silent judgment, her silver eyes holding his as Draven's justice fell. They had returned to the Onyx Citadel with the heirs safe and the traitor's head on a pike, a grim warning to any who would dare threaten the royal line again. The court had changed. The Vipers had been rooted out, their conspiracy exposed in the aftermath of Valerius's fall. Lady Isolde, broken and stripped of her rank, had been exiled to a remote northern convent, her name erased from the pack records. In their place, a new court was rising, one built on loyalty and strength of character rather than on treacherous ambition. And at its heart was a silent queen who commanded more respect with a single glance than her predecessor had with 1,000 honeyed words. Rhea still used the slate, but less and less. She had developed her own language with Draven and the pups, a language of signs, of expressions, of shared thoughts that seemed to pass between them on the wind. Her silence was no longer a wound. It was her identity. It was her strength. Her wolf, her beautiful, powerful Luna, was a part of her now, a constant, comforting presence just beneath her skin. She could call on the shift at will, the transformation as natural as breathing. Sometimes, on nights when the moon was full and bright, she and Draven would run together, a black wolf and a white wolf, two halves of a whole, leaving the cares of the crown behind to race through the ancient forest that had once been her only refuge. The forest no longer felt like a place to hide, but a place to remember, a part of her story, Draven's. Thumb stroked the back of her hand, bringing her back to the present. He turned her in his arms, his golden eyes soft in the morning light. He had changed, too. The haunted, grief-stricken king was gone, replaced by a man at peace, his power settled, anchored by her presence. The scar on his face seemed less a mark of violence and more a part of the handsome, rugged landscape of the man she loved. He lowered his head and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss full of unspoken promises and a history of shared survival. It was a kiss that said, "We made it. We are home." When he pulled back, a smile touched his lips. He reached into the pocket of his tunic and pulled something out. It was a single, perfect bluebell, its color a vibrant shock against his calloused palm. He gently tucked it into her snow-white hair, just behind her ear. Her breath hitched. The memory, once so fragmented, was crystal clear now. A sunlit market, a young warrior with golden eyes, a girl with her hair in a braid, woven, with bluebells, a moonpetal charm given with a shy promise, a life she thought had been burned to ash, but had merely been waiting to be reclaimed. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of a joy so profound it filled the silent chambers of her heart to overflowing. She raised a hand to his scarred cheek, her touch conveying everything she could not say. "I remember." He covered her hand with his own, his thumb stroking her skin. His voice was a low, contented rumble. "Welcome home, my moonbeam," he whispered. "Welcome home." And as the sun crested the mountains, bathing their kingdom in golden light, the silent queen smiled, her heart finally, complete.